Well, and God rest ye merry gentlemen and women. You caught me before a virtual Christmas cake party. I like to have a Christmas cake party every year. Unfortunately, this year will have to be virtual. But nonetheless, I have my setup here. Got the nutcracker. Say hello, nutcracker. I got a little Christmas tree. And I got my Christmas cakes and Yule log from Christmas Cakes Past. Yes, they've been in my freezer for upwards of 5 years, I think, for some of them. They did not smell very good. Mm-mm. So, I'm here to... I got a Christmas sweater as well here. So I'm here to read some Boswell for today. It's not Christmas yet, but maybe it'll get us in the Christmas cheer, huh? Too bad I can't read a Christmas passage, but I can't skip ahead. That would be cheating. So anyway, we're back in this guy's, this Irishman's recollections of, I almost said Gandalf. Johnson's, it was time with Johnson. So he's talking about Johnson. This is still not Boswell speaking. This is this other guy, Dr. Maxwell, I think. Johnson observed that a man of sense and education should meet a suitable companion in a wife. It was a miserable thing when the conversation could only be such as whether the mutton should be boiled or roasted, and probably a dispute about that. He did not approve of late marriages, observing that more was lost in point of time than compensated for it by any possible advantages. Even ill-assorted marriages were preferable to cheerless celibacy. Of old Sheridan, he remarked that he either wanted parts nor literature, that he neither wanted parts nor literature, but that his vanity and quixotism obscured his merits. I hope somebody says that about me someday, that my vanity and quixotism obscures my merits. Johnson said foppery was never cured. It was the bad stamina of the mind, which, like those of the body, were never rectified. Once a coxcomb, and always a coxcomb. Case in point here, my beard. Being told that Gilbert Cowper called him the Caliban of literature, well, said he, I must dub him the Punchinello. Punchinello? Reference I don't get, sorry, I'm not. Punchinello? Maybe it's like punch and juice. I don't know. Not gonna speculate. Don't get the reference. Punchinello. I wish I did. I won't do it right now. I'll look it up later. I'll put it in the notes. Speaking of the old Earl of Cork in Orrery, Johnson said that man spent his life in catching at an object, literary eminence, which he had not power to grasp. To find a substitution for violated morality, he said, was the leading feature in all perversions of religion, rather. He often used to quote with great pathos those fine lines of Virgil. Optima quoque dies miseris mortalibus evae prima fugit, subiunt morbi trentisque senectus, et labor, et dure rapit inclementas mortas. Which, of course, translates to, it is ever the brightest day of life that is first to bid adieu to our hapless mortality. Disease and gloomy eld steal upon us, and anon suffering and the ruthless tyranny of death sweep us away. Ooh, I'm just going to woof it. Is that this? Or no, I'm smelling this cake. Ooh, very stale. Speaking of Homer, whom he venerated as the Prince of Poets, Johnson remarked that the advice given to Diomed by his father when he sent him to the Trojan War was the noblest exhortation that could be instanced in the heathen writer, and comprised in a single line. There is now a line in Greek which I don't even know how to mispronounce because I can't even read it. But it's translated as, "Be ever best the overtop other men. Be ever best and overtop other men." Well, that's not very great advice. I mean, pretty obvious. Iliad, volume 208. This line, which, if I recollect well, is translated by Dr. Clarke thus: Semper epiter praesentissima et omnimus aliis anticlare. So that means the same thing I just said in Greek. He observed, it was a most mortifying reflection for any man to consider what he had done compared with what he might have done. Oh, okay. He said few people had intellectual resources sufficient to forego the pleasures of wine. They could not otherwise contrive how to fill the interval between dinner and supper. He went with me one Sunday to hear my old master Gregory Sharp preach at the temple. In the prefectory prayer, Sharp ranted about liberty as a blessing most fervently to be implored, and its continuance prayed for. Johnson observed that our liberty was in no sort of danger. He would have done much better to pray against our licentiousness. One evening at Mrs. Montague's, where a splendid company was assembled, consisting of the most eminent literary characters, I thought he seemed highly pleased with the respect and attention that were shown him, and asked him, on our return home, if he was not highly gratified by his visit. "No, sir," said Johnson, "not highly gratified, yet I do not recollect to have passed many evenings with fewer objections." Though of no high extraction himself, he had much respect for birth and family, especially among ladies. He said, "Advantageous accomplishments may be possessed by all ranks, but one may easily distinguish the born gentlewoman." He said the poor in England were better provided for than in any other country of the same extent. He did not mean little cantons or petty republics. Where a great proportion of the people, said he, are suffered to languish in helpless misery, that country must be ill policed and wretchedly governed. A decent provision for the poor is a true test of civilization. Gentlemen of education, he observed, were pretty much the same in all countries. The condition of the lower orders, the poor especially, was the true mark of national discrimination. When the Corn Laws were in agitation in Ireland, by which that country had been enabled not only to feed itself, but to extort corn to large amounts, Sir Thomas Robinson observed that those laws might be prejudiced to the corn trade of England. "Sir Thomas," said Johnson, "you talk the language of a savage. What, sir, would you prevent any people from feeding themselves, if by any honest means they can do it?" So he's not so much of a libertarian after all. I was giving him too much bull the other day. It was mentioned that Garrick assisted Dr. Brown, the author of The Estimate, in some dramatic composition. "No, sir," said Johnson. "He would no more suffer Garrick to write a line in his play than he would suffer him to mount his pulpit." Speaking of Burke, he said, "It was commonly observed he spoke too often in Parliament, but nobody could say he did not speak well, though too frequently and too familiarly." Speaking of economy, he remarked, "It was hardly worth while to save anxiously £20 a year. If a man could save to that degree, so as to enable him to assume a different rank in society, then indeed it might answer some purpose." I think I said anxiety. I should have said anxiously earlier. Anxiously £20 a year. He observed a principal source of erroneous judgment was viewing things partially and only on one side, as, for instance, fortune hunters. When they contemplated the fortunes singly and separately, it was a dazzling and tempting object. But when they came to possess the wives and their fortunes together, they began to suspect that they had not made quite so good a bargain. Speaking of the late Duke of Northumberland, living very magnificently when Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, somebody remarked it would be difficult to find a suitable successor to him. Then exclaimed Johnson, "He is only fit to succeed himself." He advised me, if possible, to make a good orchard. He knew, he said, a clergyman of small income who brought up a family very reputably, which he chiefly fed with apple dumplings. He said he had known several good scholars among the Irish gentlemen, but scarcely any of them correct in quantity. He extended the same observations to Scotland. Speaking of a certain prelate, later footnote here says perhaps Dr. R. Robinson, who exerted himself very laudably in building churches and parsonage houses, says Johnson. However, said he, I do not find that he is esteemed a man of much professional learning, or a liberal patron of it. Yet it is well where a man possesses any strong positive excellence. Few have all kind of merit belonging to their character. We must not examine matters too deeply. No, sir, a fallible being will fail somewhere. Talking of the Irish clergy, he said Swift was a man of great parts and the instrument of much good to his country. Berkeley was a profound scholar, as well as a man of fine imagination. But Usher, he said, was the great luminary of the Irish Church, the only one I've never heard of. And a greater, he added, no church could boast of it, at least in modern times. We dined tete-a-tete at the Mitre, as I was preparing to return to Ireland after an absence of many years. I regretted much leaving London, where I had formed many agreeable connections. Sir, said Johnson, I don't wonder at it. No man, fond of letters, leaves London without regret. But remember, sir, you have seen and enjoyed a great deal. You have seen life in its highest decorations, and the world has nothing new to exhibit. No man is so well qualified to leave public life as he who has long tried it and known it well. We are always hankering after untried situations and imagining greater felicity from them than they can afford. No, sir, knowledge and virtue may be acquired in all countries, and your local consequence will make you some amends for the intellectual gratification you relinquish. Then he quoted the following lines with great pathos. He who has early known the pomps of state, for things unknown, 'tis ignorance to condemn. And after having viewed the gaudy bait, can boldly say the trifle I contemn. With such a one contented could I live, contented could I die. Footnote here. These lines have been discovered by the author's second son in the London Magazine for July 1732, where they form part of a poem on retirement, copied with some slight variations from one of Walsh's smaller poems entitled The Retirement. They exhibit another proof that Johnson retained in his memory fragments of neglected poetry. In quoting verses of that description, he appears by a slight variation to have sometimes given them a moral turn, and to have dexterously adapted them to his own sentiments, where the original had a very different tendency. In 1782, when he was at Brighthelmstone, he repeated to Mr. Metcalfe some verses as very characteristic of a celebrated historian. Later footnote tells us this is Gibbon. They are found among some anonymous poems appended to the second volume of a collection frequently printed by Lintott under the title of Pope's Miscellanies. Now I will quote this. See how the wandering Danube flows, realms and religious parting, a friend to all true Christian foes, to Peter, Jack, and Martin. Now Protestant and Baptist now constant long to either, not constant long to either. At length an infidel does grow, and ends his journey neither. Thus many a youth I've known set out, half Protestant, half Papist, and rambling along the world about, turn infidel, or atheist. Papist, atheist is the rhyme there. I don't know about that. So why were we... That seemed kind of a tangent, giving us that poem. Okay, yeah. So I guess that's just demonstrating that Johnson memorizes poems. So we have the one poem before and the second poem. Anyway, getting back to the story at hand. Johnson then took a most affecting leave of me, said he knew it was a point of duty that called me away. We shall all be sorry to lose you, said he. Lodo Tamen. And that's the end of that guy's thoughts, I believe. So I've only done 15 minutes. I got to do those. Okay, I'll read a little bit more. So now we're up to 1771, when Johnson was 62 years old. And now this is Boswell's voice again. In 1771, he published another political pamphlet entitled Thoughts on the Late Transactions Respecting Falklands Islands, in which, upon materials furnished to him by ministry, and upon general topics expanded in his richest style, he successfully endeavored to persuade the nation that it was wise and laudable to suffer the question of right to remain undecided, rather than involve our country in another war. It has been suggested by some, with what truth I shall not take it upon me to decide, that he rated the consequence of those islands to Great Britain too low. But however this may be, every humane mind must surely applaud the earnestness with which he averted the calamity of war, a calamity so dreadful that it is astonishing how civilized, nay, Christian nations can deliberately continue to renew it. His description of its miseries in this pamphlet is one of the finest pieces of eloquence in the English language. I feel like Boswell said that a lot about everything, basically, Johnson's ever said. Upon this occasion, too, we find Johnson lashing the party in opposition with unbounded severity, and making the fullest use of what he ever reckoned a most effectual argumentative instrument, contempt. His character of their very able mysterious champion, Junius. His character of their very able mysterious champion, Junius, is executed with all the force of his genius, and finished with the highest care. He seems to have exulted in sallying forth to single combat against the boasted and formidable hero who bade defiance to principalities and powers and the rulers of this world. I don't know, what are you talking about right now? Whatever. This pamphlet, it is observable, was softened in one particular after the first edition. For the conclusion of Mr. George Grenville's character stood thus: Let him not, however, be depreciated in his grave. He has powers not universally possessed. Could he have enforced payment of the Manila ransom, he could have counted it, which, instead of retaining its sly sharp point, was reduced to a mere flat, unmeaning expression, or, if I may use the word, truism. Quote, He had powers not universally possessed, and if he sometimes erred, he was likewise sometimes right. So there's some Johnson editing of his own work. For the worse, apparently. Well, that's close enough. Next thing's a letter, and I don't want to start reading that now. So until next time, bye from Boswell. Merry Christmas. Now I'm going to eat this cake. No, just kidding. I'm not even touching that cake. It's real old. Both of them. All three of them. All right, you want to say goodbye? Bye. I'm sorry, I'm getting silly now. All right, bye from Boswell.